One of the common complaints I see about the sandbox style campaign is that the players often just feel aimless. They aren't really sure what they should be doing, and if they're starting a new campaign in a sandbox, it often feels like it just has no real direction to it. I just want to say that there are things that the game master should be doing so that isn't the case. But you, as a player, do have a large part in making the sandbox game enjoyable at the table. I think there's a different mindset that a player needs to take when they're approaching a sandbox campaign. It's a lot different than the common one that we see with the kind of overarching story narrative. And I think there's also a lot of good general advice out there on how to be a good player at your game table. Things like being a good listener, be prepared for your turns, don't get distracted on your phone. But none of that advice really informs us how we should be approaching a sandbox game. And with really those modern 5th edition and Pathfinder 2e games really leaning into that sort of overarching story style game and really kind of not using the sandbox nearly as much. If you're approaching a sandbox for the first time, whether it's in an OSR system or a more modern one like 5e, you just might not have the good sense on how you should be approaching that game and making the most of it. Hi, I'm Randall. Welcome back aboard the Earthmote. In this video, we are going to talk about a few main ideas that will help you get in the mindset as a player to really thrive in a sandbox style campaign. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing is really a mindset of seeking out adventure. I can't stress this enough. This is the most important one. The party needs to be their own motivating force within the game. The party needs to be their own motivating force within the game. There is generally no overarching story. So you need to decide what your group's goals are and what you want to accomplish within the sandbox world. You can do that by keeping track of different hooks and rumors and deciding which ones your group wants to learn more about and pursue and sort of take the focus of the sandbox in that direction. You might be wondering, well, how do we get hooks? Well, hopefully the GM is liberally sprinkling those throughout your interactions within the sandbox, but you can also talk to NPCs to learn a lot more about the surrounding area. Often a sandbox game master will have a rumor table, so interacting with the locals is likely to generate some rumors for you, and then you can sort of investigate those further and follow them up. Or perhaps you can look in the surrounding geography around you. Maybe there's very interesting landmarks or features or known ruins or dungeons. So maybe there's a ruined castle nearby. Those are all great starting points for your exploration to go off and sort of figure out what you want to do. Once you have that starting point for your exploration, look for the connections to the wider world around you as you explore it. These can be things like more NPCs within that dungeon or treasure maps, journals. Maybe the treasure itself is alluding to other areas within the sandbox. Just keep your sort of eyes and ears open as you interact with the world, and hopefully you're finding lots of different hooks or interest points that can really sort of set your direction and get you going. So as long as you're thinking about seeking out adventure and taking the initiative to do so, your group is off to a great start within the sandbox. By taking that proactive approach in sort of setting the adventure, that means you need to be informed on what the setting is and what exists within the setting. So to do that, you're going to want to ask questions about the sandbox. A lot of questions. You need to ask about the world. If you and your group have an established theme or premise for the sandbox, try asking questions to learn more about those themes within the game. Maybe it's more of a political intrigue sandbox. Well, in that case, you're going to want to know who the key players are, what their relationships are with one another, who do they like, who do they hate, who do they owe debts to, who are they politically marrying. Things like that really sort of give you the information you need to play within that theme of your sandbox. And when it comes to asking your questions, I'd start by asking the game master what sort of general knowledge your character might know about the world. You can say something like, "Hey, game master, my thief has lived within the region their entire life. What would I know about the sons of the sun god?" Your character is likely to know some basic information, so that gives you a good starting point to go off of. And eventually you'll hit a wall. They'll say something like, "Your character wouldn't know that." That's when you need to start inquiring within the game world. Ask about NPCs, factions, geography, famous locations, known inhabitants and monsters, kingdoms, societies, religions. These all give you pieces of information that let you sort of plan your next moves within the sandbox. And I really recommend identifying parts of the sandbox that are interesting to you and your group. Chances are, as your game master has sort of built their sandbox, they haven't built anything too in depth yet. But if you signal to them that you're interested in elements of the sandbox, they can spend more of their future prep time sort of further developing those parts of the sandbox that you want to explore. And it's perfectly valid to flat out tell your game master your interest in those parts of the game. You're essentially complimenting them so they'll be happy. You're saying something like, "Hey, game master, this sounds really cool. I would like to explore more about X and that part of your sandbox." They're going to be happy to get the compliment and happy that someone cares about the sandbox and be motivated to develop those parts further for their players. So that really sort of lets you kind of set your focus on one part of the sandbox as you're seeking out your adventure. And of course, as you explore those one or two elements, hopefully other hooks or ideas pop up, and you can sort of shift your focus over time as you sort of learn more about the sandbox and things that interest you within it. So ask your questions. That'll help you be informed so you can really be proactive in setting the adventure for your group. Once you sort of sought out adventure and asked your questions, you really need to start engaging with the world. I'm talking about role playing with NPCs, monsters, and factions. This will really let you sort of learn their goals and their wants and their ambitions and see how those kind of line up or challenge those of your own group. You can really sort of help to get a sense of who the major players are within the sandbox, what they want, and sort of what is that kind of relationship to your group. This really lets you develop your plans to work with or against those factions. You're really starting to create these alliances or conflicts with the different factions. And that's where the story really starts to take a lot of fun when you're creating that conflict and that tension and trying to resolve it through the role playing game. When engaging with the world, you also probably need to gather more information. Remember, information is power. We talked about asking a lot of questions. Well, at some point, you're going to have lingering questions that just can't be answered outright by the GM. So it's time to find the characters within the game world that can answer them. Hire sages to answer questions about lore or things of the arcane. You can hire scouts and spies to gather intel about locations and factions within the setting. Really sort of use this information and these opportunities engaging with the world to gather that information to help you formulate your plans and execute them as you play the game. Thirdly, when engaging with the world, you should really try to be a force in the emerging storytelling. The game master has a lot of tools to help create different emergent storytelling opportunities, but it's really up to the players to engage with those opportunities. Let's say the GM rolls up a random encounter, and that happens to be a merchant caravan that's being waylaid by orc marauders. It's perfectly valid for the players to sneak away if they haven't been sighted by either of the parties. Maybe you as a group have another goal or plan that you'd rather just get on with, or maybe you evaluate the risk versus reward and you deem it not to be worth it. That's fine. I get it. Those situations happen within the game, and that's perfectly valid. But just know as a player, you are giving up an opportunity to interact with the world. Why are the orcs raiding? Why were the merchants on the road in the first place? Do they have anything valuable? Maybe they were transporting something of importance. You'll never know if you don't engage with the different fiction opportunities that are happening around you. So, really sort of lean in and try to be that force in helping the story emerge as you're playing at the table. It's a lot more fun to actively engage than just avoid everything all the time. So, evaluate the risks and the rewards, definitely, but you are heroes. You're playing a role playing game. Try to lean into that and see what comes out of it. As you've sought out your adventure and you've asked your questions and engaged with the sandbox around you, all of that will sort of come to fruition as you're playing at the table. Eventually, as you sort of learn the information and decide on what you're going to do, you need to commit to action. Plan carefully, but act boldly. It's smart to have a plan, especially if you're playing an OSR style game where carelessness can often mean death. But don't get bogged down in analysis paralysis. Consider some of the options you have available to you and commit. Remember, the pace of the game and the flow of it is not only determined by the game master. In my experience as a GM, non-committal players are one of the greatest drainers on the pace and the flow of the game. I'm not saying don't consider your options, but at some point you do have to make a decision and just go with it. Once you commit, act boldly, pull out all the stops. This is your time to be heroic and execute your plan with gusto. I find that these are the most exciting and tense moments at the game table as your players are sort of acting out their ambitions and trying to resolve them in their favor. They can also be the most satisfying depending on the degree and success of your plan and execution. But regardless of whether you succeed or fail as a player, there's always consequences. And when you resolve one step in your plan, as you move forward in your future sessions and future exploration, those consequences can carry forward and, you get to resolve them too. And that's a lot of the fun of a role playing game, is having sort of those conflicts and tensions and resolutions and just sort of continuing to work through them as you play your sandbox. And that's really the most rewarding part, especially in a sandbox, because you as the player get to really sort of drive what your goals and ambitions are. So sort of really seeing those successes or failures is just a great part of it. And as the game master, it's exciting too, because you don't know what's going to happen. You didn't really plan any of it other than sort of reacting to what your players wanted in the first place. So it's just really cool. And it's a great way to see that sort of emerging story come to life as your players commit to their plans and take those actions. One last important thing on committing to action: at the end of a session, commit to a plan and tell your game master about it. Your GM works hard to make sure you have a great time at the table, and letting them know your intentions for the next game session is really going to help them out with their game preparation. For me personally, I'm only preparing for the next session that's going to happen at the table. I don't really plan further out than that. So having my players tell me what they're going to do next lets me get that material ready for them in the meantime. And of course, your plans and situations can change once you're at the table, but your GM should have some procedures and tools and improv skills to let them roll with it. But you are definitely helping them out by, saying that, oh, in the next session, we're going to explore Castle Black Sky, and then following through on that. That really sort of helps your GM out, and it sort of helps set you as a group, your direction, so you're just not starting the next session wondering what you're going to do. So commit to the plans and commit to the future plans at the end of your session so you guys can get your next session rolling off to a strong start. So hopefully those ideas really help you get into the mindset as a player in a sandbox campaign. I think if you keep them in mind, you'll really find that your sandbox games have a lot more direction. You'll have a lot more motivation as you sort of set those goals for your group, and you can really interact in the world. It's a lot of fun, and it's really rewarding as both a player and a game master to see those sort of emerging stories happen as your players have their own ambitions and they kind of clash with the different NPCs or factions or monsters that are within the sandbox. Let me know down below if you have any questions about the mindset of a player in a sandbox, or if you've been a player in a sandbox before. Let me know if you think I missed any important elements that people should know as they approach sandbox games. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching, and I will see you back aboard the Earthmote soon.